And Carol, I know this is an era. I call it the era. I'm always call it COVID era, but it's the pandemic era, I guess. We might want to call it. And I think I recall that you were actually working back sort of at the beginning of when this all sort of hit the news, and a lot of the precautions started going into place. And I'm wondering if you could just share with us, just from your own personal experiences with what happens in an institution when that happens, when a pandemic happens and you got to make certain changes. What was your experience with it? How did it impact you as an employee? How did it impact you just as a nurse? How did it impact the facility? Just tell us a little bit about it, because some people don't understand what happens with that.
Well, I'll tell you, I first of all, I'd like to talk to you about how it impacted the organization where I was and the OB neonatal department.
Hmm.
Um, first, one of the first things that we had to do was to set up a negative pressure room, an area, and have all of the things necessary in the event that we got a patient that was either being ruled out for COVID or had a positive COVID um, diagnosis.
Hmm.
And to set up for criteria as to how we would care for that patient, and deliver them good care, but not expose our other patients to the disease. And
Right.
so what we did is, like I said, we set up a room. This was I was at a small community hospital at the time that COVID started. And
Hmm.
what we did is that we set up, we had one negative pressure room in labor and delivery. And the decision was that if we had a patient that came in that was COVID positive or that was being ruled out for COVID, that they would go in that room, they would labor, deliver, and complete their postpartum stay in that room. And that they would, per shift, they would have primarily one nurse that would care for them, and throughout their throughout each shift during their stay, so that you didn't have two or three people going in. The other thing that I did for overall for my departments, which was OB and NICU, is because we had um, there were people that had a habit of would normally come onto the unit that had been other places in the hospital.
Oh, yeah.
And so I set up a station for the lab person. Lab was my biggest issue, because we had our own housekeeper, and we didn't have to deal with a lot of other people coming onto the unit that didn't work there. But lab was one of the areas that really concerned me, because they had a cart with all of their supplies that went in and out of all the units. And I thought, no, not on my watch. And so I set up an area. We had a nurses station that was not in use, that was adjacent to our the labor and delivery area. And it was the area that, had we gotten COVID patients, that we were going to man that unit as our COVID unit. It had been a triage area previously, but their deliveries had declined over the last couple of years, and they were triaging patients in labor and delivery. But there was a sink there, and that so I set up isolation gowns, hats, masks, the whole thing there, and with a cart of a container with all of the supplies that they would need to draw blood on, or obtain blood specimens on any of our patients. They would come to that area. They would leave their cart outside of the unit. They would scrub, gown, glove, mask, and utilize the supplies that were only used for our unit in order to gain admission to our unit. The other
Very good.
thing that happened with COVID is I lost my job.
Okay.
uh, as an interim, I mean, needless to say, like I said, it was a small community hospital, and when they shut down the ED and stopped doing elective surgeries, interim. There were three of us that were there as interims. Myself, the director for behavioral health, and the director for OR, and we were all three, our contracts were canceled because they just could not afford to keep us on when their patient population had practically dwindled down to nothing.
So let me ask you about that. You were talking about how the patient population had dwindled. Did was it just the OB and the OR population that was dwindling, or was there at the same time sort of a concurrent influx of another kind of patient that was being seen?
No,
I'm just
well,
curious.
the thing of it is the OB population remained fairly steady, and it was not, like I said, it was a small community hospital, and they
Mhm.
were doing between 40 to 60 deliveries a month. And initially, I mean, the hospital was having some financial difficulties. That was one of the reasons that I have been brought in, was to really evaluate some of the services. And they had wanted me to mentor the current manager for labor and delivery, and try to get her into a position that she could take over as director for the areas.
Okay.
Um, so the OB itself wasn't what had impacted the hospital. I don't think a lot of people realize that hospitals, their income is primarily the result of their ER visits and their elective surgeries. And with COVID, what the initially, what the instruction was, is that if folks were not having what they believed to be a life-threatening experience or COVID symptoms,
Mhm.
to do telemedicine visits with their doctor and not come to the ER.
Mhm.
So, and the same thing, and they just cut out, they were not doing, the only surgeries that were being done were emergency surgeries. All the elective surgeries were canceled until and I mean, and it's just been, I would say, within the last 3 to 4 months that hospitals have begun doing elective surgeries again. And I'm not sure what's going to happen now with this upsurge in, positive COVID patients. That may have another impact on hospitals. They may start limiting the elective surgeries again.
Hmm. And I thank you for sharing that, because I think sometimes, uh, we hear a part of it, but I don't think generally the public doesn't understand the whole issue of hospitals and how hospitals are funded, and which areas are really the revenue generating areas within a hospital. So thank you very much for sharing that. I
Well,
think that's
you're
very
welcome, because I don't think they realize that, I mean, with a lot of the patients, particularly if you're talking about, the most vulnerable of those patients, you
important.
know, may not have the best insurance, you know, available. I mean, a lot of them are on Medicare or Medicaid, and, and that does not provide good reimbursement to hospitals, and
Right.
and hospitals can't turn patients away if they don't have insurance. They have to care for them.
Hmm. Yes, and so we often talk about sort of the economic impact of what we're seeing, like
Yeah.
secondary to the pandemic, but you're bringing to our attention, and rightfully so. I think that there is another economic impact that we don't talk about that much, and that's hospitals having to try to absorb some of these costs that are
Yeah.
here, or the miss, or absorb the fact that they have less revenue uh, to do basically. more
It's a major,
affected.
it is truly a major issue for hospitals because even people that had good insurance, if they've lost their jobs,
Yes.
then a lot of them have, they may have had good insurance to begin with, but depending how long they're unemployed, they could lose their medical benefits as well.
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
if their benefits were provided by their employer.
Correct. Yes. Yes. Well, thank you, Carol. You brought up some very interesting points, and I'm sure that in some later conversations, we're probably going to hear more about that. I think the issue of the COVID era, as I'm calling, is going to be with us for a little while. And so I think that when we have people who are knowledgeable, such as yourself, about some of these impacts, that's really important to us as we get deeper into our conversations, particularly as those of us who are, I'm retired now, so I don't count, but those of us who are healthcare professionals, who are sort of in the thick of things sometimes, knowing that we're doing things, but not really knowing the understories that are going along with it. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. That was very, very helpful. Thank you so much. So let me sort of switch the conversation here just a little bit. I mentioned at the introduction that Carol here has traveled so extensively all over the world. She really has. I'm going to sort of put her on the spot here, but I want you to think of just. I want to know, what are your top three of all the places you've been? What do you think are your top three places that you have the best memories of? I'll put it that way.
Well, Gloria, I have to tell you, Ghana is at the top of my list now since
Yeah.
we've been traveling there because I feel like Senior Baraku is a second home. And my children are afraid that I'm going to move there. And they have good reason to feel that way.
I'm
I
sure.
just might. But in addition to that, I think the other places that really have struck a chord with me, as I love Italy.
Uh-huh.
And I've traveled to Italy on several occasions, and it is one of my favorite places as
So what?
well.
Let me ask you for a minute before you go to number three. Tell me, what is it about Italy that you love so well, so much?
The people are friendly, and I think that I have been very, very lucky in all of my travel because I have been well received everywhere I go. And you know me well enough to know that I'm a busybody. I will stop people on the street and, well,
Yeah.
are you a native here? How long have you been here? What, that kind of thing. But I've had, it's just that, in like I said, I've traveled there on several occasions, and I've been very fortunate. I have a couple that I actually met in Egypt. That the wife was originally from Italy, and we really bonded on the Nile cruise. We were on the Nile cruise
Yeah.
together in Egypt, and we really kind of bonded. And when they had their 20th wedding anniversary in Bologna, um, on the Lake Como, it was amazing. They invited me to join them for their 20th anniversary, and I mean, it was just lovely. You know,
Beautiful. Beautiful.
and like I said, I tend to stay on the economy, so when I visited with another friend and colleague, actually, I think someone that Cheryl, you remember
Oh
Cheryl?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Cheryl and I went to Cinque Terre together, and we rented an apartment, there. So we really lived like they lived, and I mean, it was just a wonderful experience. And like I said, I mean, I was very well accepted, and people treated me very well, and, answered all my questions, and,
Yes.
that kind of thing. And one of the other places that I really enjoyed was Morocco.
Ah. Tell us about
Right.
it.
Yeah, you know what? Almost every place on the African continent I like, but Morocco was, you know, it was probably, when I think about it, it was the most exotic place that I visited, more so than like even India or, you know, Thailand, you know, around in that area. I mean, the people there are very exotic, I think.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
you should go.
Yeah, I'm listening to you. I'm going to write that on my little list here. I have what I call a post-COVID travel list,
Yeah.
and that list is getting longer and longer the more I talk to
Oh,
people.
I know. Well, at least
And
then I'm
longer,
hoping then that post-COVID, maybe I'll have a travel buddy.
definitely, definitely, you can count on that. You can count on it for sure. Well, that this is just so interesting, and I want to touch on just now. I keep switching horses with you because I'm gonna switch over to another piece. So now we've talked a little bit about uh, your work. We've talked about your travels, which we could talk. That could be another whole interview session right there. I think all by itself. You brought us into the world of what it was like to be a nurse working in a hospital as an administrator, basically as an administrator from those administrative lands. We don't get those lands too often. Those are not shared with us. So thank you for sharing those. So we've heard that now. So now I want to go back. Now I'm going to bring it back home to the Villager Awards. And I always like to ask people sort of what was their first impression, number one, uh, of the Villager Awards when you first received your award. And you've been coming back since then. You kept coming back, and we really appreciate that. But tell us why. Give us a little bit of an
Well,
insight
you
into
know,
what you felt and saw.
well, I tell you, Gloria, there are a couple of reasons that I keep coming back. Number one, all of the interesting people that, you know, the award winners, but not just the award winners, but the other people, a lot of them are previous award winners. You
Yes,
know, I've actually made some friends that I look forward to seeing them every year, you know, that also attend the Villager Awards on an annual basis. You know, Berenicia from Brazil, and my a very close friend of mine who's an alpha. A bunch of the alphas always show up, and they're always interesting.
they do.
Yeah.
Yes, they do.
And you know, but the other thing is that, like you said, you know that I live in New Mexico, which
Yes,
is a very diverse, you know, um, area. And
yes,
it is so interesting to me to meet other folks that look like me,
yes,
that have you know, have really made it in this world. And you know, as folks that, you know, that I can get more information about a lot of, you know, a lot of other areas outside of nursing and hospitals, because I mean, like I said, half my family is medically, you know, I mean, are in the
yes.
hospital setting.
Uh-huh.
And I have grandchildren that I need to coach into, you know, to let them know that, you know, there are lots of opportunities that are available to them. And should they choose something different, you know, at least then it's given me resources that I can have them connect with to get more information. And
Yes.
you know, I think that that's, you know, I mean, and somebody that will genuinely support them and help them, point them in the right direction
Hmm. Hmm.
to, you know, to succeed in whatever they might choose to do.
Yes. And I'm so happy to hear you say that because among our of course, we have our mission and our vision, which is, of course, to bring people together. And people really from diverse circumstances. They really are. They're from all over the world. They're from all over the continent of the U.S., all over the African diaspora. We get them from all over the African continent as well. And they really become a strong network for each other and for other people external to their networks. And so we chose that mantra, lift as we climb. just for that. That's really what that really is about, and it has to be sort of an identifiable match, so that when you're there, we want people to feel like they're home. I mean, we want them to feel like you're home, feel like you're with people that you can talk about almost anything with. Feel like everybody that's there is willing to do exactly that. Really
And
willing
they
to
are.
feel
I
like
mean, you know what?
they
I
are.
really and truly, and when you talk to the other recipients, all of them are involved in mentoring to some degree, depending
Hmm.
on, what their area of expertise is. They are all out there, impacting, the world.
Appreciate that. You see what we got. You mentioned your granddaughters, and I can see the generational pieces of that. And you'll start to see that rise up as well. And so we're just really excited about it. So, Carol, I'm going to sort of wrap it up here now, and I want to just say thank you. And I wanted to ask you if you had just a final word that you wanted to say to our audience out here.
Well, I just want to say thank you to you and to all of them. I'm excited about seeing, I mean, a lot of the Villager Award winners I've met, but I'm sure there are some that I haven't. And I am really excited to hear about their backgrounds, because a lot of them, I may have met them, but I don't know, a lot about their background, because I think we've all had different experiences. I know just in the few people that I've talked to, my experience growing up was very different, like than yours in,
Yes.
you know, being in Oklahoma, that is very, very different than the childhood I had growing up in Detroit.
Yes. 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 And I think this is my hope that as we learn more about each other with that will now expand out into the world as well. So that, because I really think that people, no matter who we are or where we come from, our stories have been isolated from each other too long. And so people have heard me say, I hate the word diversity. I don't like it because it sounds sort of divisive to me. And I really like coming together part of it, so that these stories
Well,
come
you know
together.
what? Since you said this, I heard something from a close friend of both of ours the
Okay.
other day about oh gosh, about diversity, talking about diversity and inclusion.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that, and I was asked the question about what's the difference between diversity and inclusion. And I kind of went on and on about and what their description of, which I thought was excellent, is that diversion is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance.
I love that. I love that. I love that. And I'm going to hold on to that, because I think that I was asking for a closing word. I want to hold on to that. That
Oh,
is
well,
perfect.
somebody might be mad at you. I might be
That's
stealing their
okay.
clothing.
I'm sure we're going to take it over and claim it right now. That's okay. That's all right. So thank you very much, Carol. I really appreciate this, like I said.